It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome, fellow Quillers, to this special 12th Night episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. The date of release of this episode is Wednesday, January 5, 2022, also known as 12th Night, the eve of the Epiphany. But before we begin this episode, I'd like to point out that over the past 3 years, yes, 3 years, we're almost on our anniversary episode coming up in the next episode, as a matter of fact. But in that time, I've had so many guests on this program with so many different views and opinions. I'm not sure I could even record them all in an Excel spreadsheet that would make any sense to anyone. But nonetheless, each of those guests have been exactly that. They've been a guest of this program. And if my mother taught me anything as a good Italian boy, it was to treat guests appropriately as guests. And I have been very grateful to each and every one of the guests that have appeared here on the program over the last 3 years. Grateful to them for agreeing to come on the program. Grateful to them for agreeing to figure out the technology to record with me remotely, most of them, and to grace me with their company and their conversation. And that said, here's a reminder that the views and opinions of the host and guests of this program do not reflect the views or positions of our sponsors. Listeners are encouraged to conduct their own research and come to their own understanding of the complexities of the Shakespeare authorship question. I think that's important, don't you think? Because it is true. Hey, I have my opinion, you have your opinion, and every one of my guests has had their own opinions, and the whole point of the program is to discuss those opinions and figure out where we stand. Where do you stand? Do you know? I'm not sure. I always am firm and securely planted in my decisions of the moment because information changes. New revelations occur. I am blown away regularly by guests who come here with their latest research. And I always say, I'm not capable of doing the stuff that most of my guests are capable of doing. And I don't have a book published to my name, which many of my guests do. So one thing I'll tell you is it's about your views, your opinions. And what we always say here on the program is keep asking questions, right? So now, here we go. A word from our sponsors. Justice John Paul Stevens and 3 out of 3 Oxfordian lawyers surveyed, that's barristers for you Brits, by the way, prefer to reject the Stratfordian myth. Don't fall for the Stratfordian myth. Get your full subscription today to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship Quarterly Newsletter by joining the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship today. Join Oxfordian barristers Dorothea Dickerman, Brian Wildenthal, Alex McNeil, and authorship skeptic, the dearly departed, Justice John Paul Stevens in questioning the Stratfordian myth. For more information, visit ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. That's ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. Don't fall for the Stratfordian myth. Get your membership today. And now, fellow Quillers, before we embark on our 12th night journey, I would like to share with you a few details about 12th night. Well, traditionally, January 5 marks the 12th and final night of the Christmas season. The 12 days of Christmas, beginning on Christmas night, December 25, then end on the day of the Epiphany, January 6th, which means that 12th night is actually January 5th. During Elizabethan times, and in fact, dating back long before that to the Middle Ages or even earlier, the 12 days of Christmas were a period of continuous feasting and celebration that culminated on Twelfth Night, January 5th. The famous song that we all love to hate and hate to love memorializes the 12 days of celebration and 12 days of gift giving associated with the culmination of the Advent. In Middle Age tradition, that final night was also known as the Feast of Fools, which was very pagan, by the way. And oftentimes there would be a festival during which a king of fools would be crowned from the peasantry and treated like royalty. Ironically, the famous festival at Abydos in ancient Egypt had a very similar tradition, except then it was a slave who was chosen to play the role of the god Osiris. That slave would be lavished through the day and into the night like a god before being sacrificed the next day as part of the theatrics. It was a one-night only performance, and you could call it a command performance. They went willingly. They wanted to have that magnificent day of splendor and then die. It was crazy theater. You want to talk about the origins of theater? That's what we call crazy theater. But back to the feast, festival, festi of fools that was Twelfth Night in the Elizabethan era. And notice I made that comment, fair festi of fools. In my mind, our author has connected this tradition of the feste, the festival of fools, to the prominence of the character festi in the play Twelfth Night, what Olivia calls in the play the allowed fool. In this bard's play, that character, Festi, is so important in Twelfth Night. Well, where does the play come from? We've got a little sense of the tradition of the history of the festival, but where does this play come from? Well, there are a lot of theories about that, but Twelfth Night was an unregistered play before it first appeared in the first folio of 1623. There were no quartos, nothing. But as with so many of the Bard's plays, we have this, written mention of it regarding a performance much earlier than the 1623 date of publication. In fact, there's a performance mentioned at Middle Temple in 1602, and it's recorded then as, quote, a play called Twelfth Night or What You Will. And that comes in the diary of a lawyer, that's a barrister for you Brits, by the name of John Manningham. Now, don't ask me if he's famous for anything else, because I don't know. I haven't looked him up. I didn't do my research on that before preparing this episode. However, you can. You know how to Google John Manningham. That's spelled with two N's, by the way. And he writes about this performance that he saw in 1602. However, the reason I didn't delve into John Manningham is because there's also this guy, Johannes de Witt, who in 1596 draws up this very famous sketch of the Swan Theater that depicts a scene in the sketch that many believe to be the scene where Malvolio shows up in Twelfth Night with his yellow cross-gartered stockings. And if that is true, if what you see in that sketch, and that's up to you to decide, isn't it? Go look for it. Johannes, that's Johhannes de Witt, W-I-T-T, 1596. Tell me what you see. Do you see a scene from Twelfth Night? If you do, that would indeed change the dating of the play. That scene, so specific, so funny, easy to spot, I think, in any sketch. If you consider the topical allusions to in-court events. I mean, Elizabethan court. At the time this play was written, and there's some argument about when that could have been, or at the time it was first performed, if 1602 is truly the first performance, at the time that it was published. If you consider the in-court events of any time, and we'll talk about the actual date in a minute, but if we can talk about those in-court events, the Elizabethan court, things that we know historically to be accurate, I say that what you find is that in that nutshell, I could be bounded by a nutshell. Sorry, I'm digressing. That was my Hamlet quote for the episode. But think about it. I believe that historical analysis is the true key to these plays. And it's that area of study that historians need to attach themselves to make a name for themselves in the near future of this field. Because if you look at the works from a historical value perspective, everything changes. If you try to date the works by their allusions to court politics, and then connect that to the history of what was going on in the Elizabethan court, I think that's the solution. And I think once you have that solution, then you obviously have who could have known, who could have been a part of it, who was privy, pardon the pun, privy council, who was privy to what was happening in the Elizabethan court at that time, and who could have written these works about that so accurately. And I think that's one of the crucial keys to this play. So I like to call that the Oxfordian lens. But what historians, if they so choose to do, they could describe it as the Elizabethan court lens if they want to. It's the lens of the Elizabethan court personalities. And there is so much to learn about Elizabethan history through the Shakespeare canon if you study the Shakespeare canon from that viewpoint, from what it informs us about the Elizabethan court at the time during a span of probably pretty close to 20 years, I'd say. Everybody can argue about that one too, but I'm going to say a good solid close to 20 years. And when you look at the two characters that are a part of that lens, that Elizabethan lens or that Oxfordian lens, you find the characters of Elizabeth, the Queen, and Edward de Vere. And you find that they are forever connected. And it doesn't matter what you believe in this sense. It only matters what we know in this sense. And we have enough documents, enough evidence, enough letters, enough stories by other eyewitnesses who have written letters and written accounts and stories. We know that Elizabeth and Edward are tied together no matter what. They are forever connected in some way, and in some places we believe many more ways than have been revealed, but the truth is they are connected. So if you look at the Shakespeare authorship question through the Elizabethan lens, with just an Elizabethan mindset, just the Queen's lens, and you consider the players clearly and historically that are represented in the plays of Shakespeare, then the Elizabethan lens cannot but lead you to Edward de Vere and the Oxfordian lens, and Edward de Vere, whom I say is the conspicuously inconspicuous character of the Elizabethan court in history. Now, parse that, if you will. The conspicuously inconspicuous character. He is the most conspicuously inconspicuous character of them all. And when I'm directing plays and I'm sharing with actors ways to layer their characters and make them human, I always tell them that they need to develop the consistent inconsistency. And that's the physicality of a character that is their go-to. It is their moment of stress, their moment of anguish, their moment of extreme thought, their moment sometimes of pleasure. It is the one thing, their fidgety thing that they do. As human beings, we all have one. Do you bounce your knee? Do you chew on a pencil? Do you play with the ring on your ring finger? Do you pull at the earring in your ear? Do you twist your hair? We all have them. We all have these mannerisms, right? And I say to actors, well, if you want to create a real character, if you want to layer on the layers of humanity onto the role, then one of the things you must choose accurately is the consistent inconsistency of your character, their master gesture, the thing that they do that is different from what any other character does, but they do it so consistently that that inconsistent part of them becomes a consistent identifier for us, the audience, as to who that character is. Now, let's connect that to, I hope I haven't lost everybody, but let's connect that to the conspicuously inconspicuous character that is Edward de Vere. So here's what I ask you. If Edward is not represented in the characters of the plays of Shakespeare, the way that other major members of the Elizabethan court are connected, and we're going to talk about that momentarily, then where is he? That makes him conspicuously inconspicuous. And if we believe that he is so, then the way the circumstantial evidence of the plays points to, then I ask you, is that an easier way to find where he is represented? And the author character has to be represented. And we'll talk about that in a moment. We can find Elizabeth clearly represented in the play Twelfth Night as Olivia. I don't think that anyone questions that. Not even Orthodoxy and Stratfordians have a way to wiggle out of the ways that Olivia reflects Elizabeth. Ironically, in this play, Oxford is represented as her clown, Feste. This Twelfth Night Feste that we are experiencing. Her allowed fool, as she refers to him in the text. That's interesting, isn't it? The allowed fool. Well, when the sovereign power allows a fool to be a fool, is she not granting him permission to poke fun at all the members of court to her delight? And everything we know about Elizabeth says, well, that makes total sense, doesn't it? Now let's talk about other members of court who are represented in this play. If Elizabeth is Olivia, then every Oxfordian I know points to and some Stratfordians I know point to Malvolio as a direct lampooning of the courtier Christopher Hatton, the would-be and most likely for some time lover, and thus at one time hopeful king to Elizabeth's queen. Oh, well, that's completely lampooned in the character of Malvolio. And the rivalry between Oxford, Elizabeth's boar, as is the animal upon his crest, and Christopher Hatton, Elizabeth's mutton or sheep, as she called him, which is very well documented. In fact, even admitted by Christopher Hatton, in direct letters from him to Elizabeth, wherein he refers to himself in one particular case as a black sheep when he is apart from her, and then warns her of the tusks of the boar that is Oxford, his rival. Well, here you have Hatton warning the queen about Oxford the boar. And you have Oxford firing back the best way he knows how in this lampooning of his rival in this play called Twelfth Night, where Christopher Hatton is represented by the character Malvolio. Now add to this mix the character of Sir Andrew Aguecheek, who is definitely a caricature of the poet courtier Philip Sidney, who was another key rival of the Earl of Oxford. The famous Oxford-Sidney rivalry is a must-know for every quiller. And start with looking up the tennis court incident, which is something that every quiller needs to be aware of. And you can find reference to it in a large number of places and sources. It's the tennis court battle. Oxford calls Sidney a puppy. That causes a huge stir. They have challenges of duels, which the Queen forbids, and it becomes its own true comedy, which then becomes fodder for this play. Because Aguecheek, if he is Sidney, and I believe he is, has more than one moment in the play where he is pressed into the idea of a duel that he does not want to actually commit to. It's a hilarious moment between he and Viola while she's in disguise as Cesario. And then he bumps into Sebastian later, who he believes to be Viola. And yet Sebastian is no longer just as cowardly as Viola, who is just as cowardly as Aguecheek. And it's a hilarious combination of scenes. And you could just think about Oxford lampooning his enemies in this play as the allowed fool of the Queen during a winter festival when everybody is cold and snowed in and frozen and yet wanting to party all night long with giant fires burning in the fireplace and court performances happening. Now, here's another thing to point out, because we don't want to forget how incestuous, and yes, I used that word on purpose, how incestuous the Elizabethan court was. Let's not forget that Philip Sidney is the nephew of Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, and there are plenty of episodes of this program where we've pointed out where Leicester and Oxford definitely have reason to hate each other. Not only that, but Sidney is also the son-in-law of Francis Walsingham, the Queen's spy master. You want to talk about everybody knowing everybody and being cousins to everybody. These were very formidable men with formidable power. And the thing about our guy Edward, he really knew how to develop the best enemies. I mean, when you look at the laundry list of Oxford's enemies, it's no wonder he was able to create anything ever, be remembered for anything ever, and wasn't completely wiped from the face of history. Like that Egyptian pharaoh that they tried to erase by scraping her out. If she was the female pharaoh, they tried to scrape her out of all of the hieroglyphs and all of the statuary. That's what they tried to do to this guy. And luckily for us, they weren't successful. But it was those types of literary rivalries that were going on between Edward and Christopher and Edward and Philip that led to the greatest literature of the day. We should probably be happy that it did so. These courtiers were publishing pamphlets, poems, and prose. You see what I did there? Publishing pamphlets, poets. Woo. Let's see if I can do that quick. This is what we, in the theater world, we use these for vocal warm-ups. Publishing pamphlets, poems, and prose. Publishing pamphlets, poems, and prose. Publishing pamphlets, poems, and prose. These guys were publishing pamphlets, poems, and prose against each other in rapid fire, just like that. Sometimes they published under someone else's name. Sometimes they published under an assumed name. Sometimes they published under a caricature name or a Latin name as part of some sort of internal joke. They used veiled identities, veiled themes, and even buried clues in their verse in order to make their stabs against each other with impunity. Some writers only wrote what they were paid to write. Here's a case in point. Look at a man named William Rankin. There's a rabbit hole for you diehards to fall into. Who is William Rankin? Don't ask that. We could be here forever. But go ahead. Hit pause. Go Google William Rankin. Come back. I'll be here. If not, wait till the episode's over and then go search William Rankin. But don't forget that while all this intrigue is happening in Elizabeth's court, Hatton, Sidney, De Vere, this intrigue that is so accurately lampooned in this play, Twelfth Night, that was occurring in Elizabeth's court circa 1580. Now let's look back. We talked about the first publication, the folio, 1623. We talked about the first recorded instance that we have on paper as a document in the diary of the barrister that mentioned seeing a performance 1602. But the idea is that the things this play is talking about, the things that this play is stabbing at, the people, the moments, the key elements of the historical record that this play is based in 1580. At that time, ladies and gentlemen, Will Shakespeare of Strats was 16 years old. Wait, what? Yeah, that's a thing. So that's a big hole, isn't it? That's a big problem for the orthodoxy, is that this play clearly points to characters and incidents that were occurring in the Elizabethan court historically circa 1580. Regardless of when it's first registered, regardless of when it's first recorded as a performance, it is connected to events that occurred circa 1580. And Shakespeare of Stratford was 16 years old and nowhere near the Elizabethan court. That's a problem that they can't explain. We have an explanation, and it has to do with the man who was there. All of these historical figures are represented in the chief literature of their age. How would a Stratford man be able to do such a thing? And more importantly, why isn't Oxford lampooned as a character in these plays? Hatton, Burleigh, the Queen herself, Leicester. So many of these key characters show up in all these plays. Not once can orthodoxy scholars say, oh, and here's where the Earl of Oxford actually pops up in one of these plays, and that's why he's not the author, and that's why our guy from Stratford is the author who lampooned them all. Except that's not the case, is it? So where is Oxford in the plays? Well, what if he's the author? What if he's the author character? And in Twelfth Night, I believe Feste represents that character. So many characters at court are now undeniably recognized in the works of Shakespeare that this is a line of study that I believe needs to be pointed to. Burleigh represented in Hamlet as Polonius. Hatton represented in Twelfth Night as Malvolio. Sidney represented in Twelfth Night as Aguecheek. The Queen represented everywhere. I mean, she's Olivia, she's Cleopatra, she's Titania, she's so many characters. Where is Oxford represented in the works of Shakespeare? And I'm not talking about the historical plays where the Oxford family is represented and quite honestly painted out to be heroes regardless of whether it's true. That's interesting. But if Oxford is not represented in the works of Shakespeare, why not? Would he have been able to escape Shakespeare's pen? This man who was the dandy of the court and then the pariah of the court, a loved above all and then thrown into the tower and hated by all, embraced and financially supported by the queen, and then also ostracized and banished at times. Where is he in the aim of this very barbed writer who saw fit to lampoon the highest figures of the Elizabethan court on a regular basis? Why is Oxford not present in at least one of Shakespeare's plays if the Shakespeare man was firing his arrows as indiscriminately as the plays depict most of the time, but one character is regularly spared? That's my new argument. That's my new line of questioning. That's my new Oxfordian position. If Oxford isn't the author, where is he in the plays? If nothing else, one of the things we Oxfordians have been able to do is to focus incredible attention on the life of Edward de Vere over the last 100 years. And as I say so often on this program, his life deserves a very visual telling upon the screen. And I know that there are listeners out there who are feverishly working on their screenplays and trying to pitch them to HBO and Netflix and Prime and Showtime and whoever. And I guarantee you, I promise you, one of them is going to see the value of telling this man's story, even if it doesn't involve the Shakespeare authorship question. But again, I say he is conspicuously absent from the stories we have read and seen of Elizabeth I. And the more and more we direct our spotlight on this man, the more and more people have to ask, why has he been so absent from all the Elizabeth stories? In previous Hollywood tellings, Essex and Rosalie have been there. Leicester has been there. Burleigh has been there. Walsingham has been there multiple times through multiple queens, such as Bette Davis, Kate Blanchett, and my favorite, Helen Mirren. Where is Edward? We have proven he deserves attention, if not at least mention. But why has he been purposefully targeted for erasure from the record? I think that's a very valuable question. So let's shift gears in a minute about the origins of the play. But before we do that, first a word from our sponsors. You know, in keeping with the theme of today's episode, it isn't too late to purchase that holiday gift for that person in your life who is so difficult to buy for. The last couple of years, when I have renewed my annual membership to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, I have also purchased a guest membership for a friend or loved one who has at some time asked me about my membership in the organization. I don't know if any of them have actually renewed their membership, but it has been a great way to introduce them to a deeper layer of understanding of what it means to be an Oxfordian. When you renew your membership this year, or finally decide to join the organization for the first time, make a choice to share the organization with someone else by purchasing a guest membership. You can join the organization for as little as $44, and then gift memberships are just $35 each. If you have a friend or loved one who has asked you about your Oxfordianism at any time in your past, gift them a membership. You never know how many more questions they will choose to ask. ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. That's right, ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, where you can find your link to joining online easy peasy. ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. Go inspire some questions. So, back to our discussion of the origins behind Twelfth Night, the play. It's set in a place called Illyria, which is an ancient region of the Balkans on the Adriatic coast, say most sources, which ironically was actually ruled during Elizabeth's time by the Orsini family and a real Count/Duke Orsino. However, see what I did there? However, Mark Anderson makes a strong case in his book, Shakespeare by Another Name, for Illyria being modeled more after Ragusa on the island of Sicily. And if you read Mark's entries on this topic, you'll wind up rereading his entire book again, because that's what Mark's book can do for you, especially when you go looking into things and rabbit hole into there. And, I've mentioned this before. I own multiple copies because once I have given somebody a gift membership to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, if they get hooked in any way, if they become more intrigued, if they have more questions, I give them a copy of Mark's book. And so here's a little secret. Don't you all go out there and start buying up used copies of Shakespeare by Another Name, because that's my game. I go up and I find good used copies. I buy them and then I give them to people. And one of the ways that I make sure they don't end up back in the used circle is I do what my mother always told me, which is when you give someone a book, you inscribe on the inside of the cover. You write something to them. You tell them. And usually I say, hey, I hope this will convince you to start asking more questions about this topic. There you go. So there's a secret clue I just gave you all on how to spread Oxfordianism around the world, converting one Oxfordian at a time. So Mark's book points out that there are indeed plenty of commedia influences in Twelfth Night. And as a theater artist, I see them very clearly. We have no doubt that Edward, Earl of Oxford, spent time in Siena, one of his favorite cities, and the name of my second daughter for that reason. Siena Elizabeth Sable. She's one of the biggest sweethearts on the planet. And so Edward was in Siena on or about 12th night, January 5. So we know that he was definitely there January 3, 1576, because he wrote a letter to his father-in-law, Lord Burleigh, on that day, which was posted from Siena. So here he is near what turns out to be near the end of his Italian travels. He's been there for more than a year at this time. And at the time of Edward's visit in Siena in 1576, there was a tradition there for a 12th night performance of plays during the 12th night festival season. And one of the most famous plays performed every year during 12th night festivities was a play called The Deceived, written by an acclaimed master of Italian comedy, Alessandro Piccolomini. Say that with me. Alessandro Piccolomini. Piccolomini was the founder of a group roughly translated from Italian into English called the Academy of the Deaf and Daft. Definitely not politically correct, but it's 1576, so I don't think he really cared. But basically, it was this very special, it's like the Saturday Night Live team of Siena, right? They're this Commedia dell'arte troupe. They're a group of secret noblemen who ruled the Sienese artistic landscape while also serving as its most prominent citizens. Wait a minute, what? What did he just say? Oh yeah, these noblemen working in secret to be artists in their community. Go figure. So on January 3, 1576, De Vere writes this letter to his father-in-law, Lord Burleigh, from Siena. That's 2 days before the 12th Night Festival that year. We're not going to go into the contents of the letter because that's a whole nother story. But what we are going to talk about is the fact that we know De Vere is in Siena during the 12th night, 12 Days of Christmas festival, knowing that two plays are about to be performed back to back the next two nights, could he have resisted remaining in Siena for just two more nights? Probably not. I would have stayed. You couldn't have torn me away. It may have even been the reason Edward was so suddenly worried about his creditors, which is part of the contents of his letter to his father-in-law. He needed more money. He wanted to party hard for 12th night in Siena. That's what I think. That's what I would have done. Now, here's the next thing I want to ask you. You want to guess the plot line of Piccolomini's famous 12th night play? Anybody? Anyone? Bueller? Are you with me? Anyone want to know the plot of The Deceived? Well, let's talk it through together. A brother and a sister set of twins are the focus of the play. The sister falls in love with a nobleman who is busy pining away for the love of another woman who is unmoved by him. The sister disguises herself as a male servant who carries love messages back and forth to the woman for the nobleman, her new master. The twin brother, thought to be dead, suddenly arrives to set things aright. He falls in love with the nobleman's intended lady, and that leaves the nobleman free to marry his twin sister. Everyone is very happy after a lot of laughs, mostly based in the misidentity of this story. You can't write this stuff. Except that P.S. Piccolomini did write it, De Vere watched it, and then he rewrote it in true commedia style in his own home, town, and country to lampoon his enemies in the Elizabethan court. That's the story, folks. You can't make it up. But wait, there's more. Piccolomini's play, and I'm going to mess this up with, even though I have an Italian background, this is a difficult word. Gliginati. His play, Gliginati, which is The Deceived, was traditionally followed by another of his plays on successive nights. So January 4th would have been the Gliginati, The Deceived, the 12th night basis play. And then January 5th, 12th night, that day, that play was called Il Sacrificio, The Sacrifice. It's a very short play, sort of like a Disney short cartoon before the feature film that they used to do. I think they're actually bringing that back now. But this play had a plot line of characters who renounced love at all costs. And instead of sacrificing for love, they sacrificed to Minerva, the spear-shaking Roman version of the spear-shaking Greek goddess, Pallas Athena. Let me repeat that for just a minute. So the first night, January 4, the day after Edward writes the letter from Siena to his father-in-law, is Gliginati, The Deceived, the base story for 12th Night, almost character for character when it comes to principal characters. The next night, Il Sacrificio, The Sacrifice, where the characters are all sacrificing to the spear-shaking goddess. Could that 12th night, January 5th, 1576, have been the evening of creation of the pen name Shakespeare? Think about that for a minute. Certainly, it inspired a great play. but did it also inspire the name that play would eventually be published under? So much of Italy and Edward's Italian adventures have shaped so much of what the works of Shakespeare would later become. From the Titian paintings that we've talked about in so many other episodes, to now Piccolomini. Why couldn't Il Sacrificio be the source of the pseudonym Shakespeare? I hope smarter scholars than me will pursue that line of research further and bring us back some answers on that, because that's pretty cool. I think that's really, really cool. But wait, there's more. I know. Just when you were going to buy those Ginsu knives, here's more. In the cathedral in Siena, Italy, which is known for its ability to rival the greatest cathedrals in all of Italy, there is a very unique and very special painting called The 7 Ages of Man. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I'm telling you, you can't make it up. Does this sound familiar? Of course it does, but that's another episode for a whole nother day. And I'll invite my wife back onto the program to discuss As You Like It, because she played the role of Rosalind in a production that we put on several years ago when I had the Redland Shakespeare Festival in Southern California. And it is the largest female role in the canon. And I think you'd be interested in hearing what she has to say about what it's like to take on such a role in its magnitude. It's the Hamlet of female roles, ironically. More so than Cleopatra. That's the truth. You can look it up. But let's get back to Twelfth Night. So here's some other Oxfordian connections to this play. It's just one of a trilogy of plays that are filled with extremely accurate uses of language and knowledge of seafaring. It's called one of the shipwreck trilogies, in fact. And there you go. There's a quiz question for you right there. What are the 3 shipwreck plays of the Shakespearean canon? Here we go. They are The Tempest, this play, Twelfth Night, and anyone? Okay, you can debate among yourselves. I'll give you the answer at the next episode. So this shipwreck trilogy of plays has this extremely accurate use of language and knowledge of seafaring that point to Oxford's hand, guided by his many experiences at sea. This is so connected to, and we cannot forget to mention, Oxford's personal experience with seafaring. And when we talk about his personal experience with seafaring, not only talk about shipwrecks, but we also talk about, say it with me, fellow Quillers, pirates. Pirates! 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 All of these things connected. When you tie these plays together this way, through this lifetime of this man, it's undeniable. So there's one final segment to talk about to connect Oxford to Twelfth Night. But before we move on to that final segment of our exploration into the Oxfordian connections to this play, I would like to remind you that there is still time to give a 12th night of Christmas gift to someone special in your life by giving them a $35 gift membership to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. In fact, on this 12th day of Christmas, why not give 12 memberships? On the 12th day of Christmas, my true Oxfordian gave to me 12 memberships, 11 quarterly newsletters, 10 Oxfordians, 9 books by Oxfordians, 8, oh God, I can't go on. 5 Shakespeare plays. Why not give a gift membership today? Go to ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. Join today. Give a gift membership. it's not too late. Getting back to where we were about Oxford's connections to this play. In Hank Whittemore's 100 Reasons Shakespeare Was the Earl of Oxford, if you don't own it, go get it. Reason number 77 illustrates what would otherwise be a very confusing scene, and one that even I myself as a producer-director have felt challenged by in trying to make it play well for an audience when producing this play, Twelfth Night. And it's the scene that is actually an outright inquisition of the Jesuit priest Edmund Campion. There is no way that we can know if this scene in its entirety was ever actually performed before the Queen and her Protestant agents, most notably Burleigh and Walsingham. But in its current form that we find in the first folio, it is a damning finger in the eye of those operatives who conducted what became a kangaroo court, whereupon Campion was imprisoned in darkness, deprived pen and ink for fear of the power of his writings, placed on a monkey trial, condemned to death, then hanged, drawn, and quartered. The author of Twelfth Night uses the Christmas season of revelry and feast, but also praise and reflection, to deliver inside a comedic play the pages of outright condemnation of the actions of the Elizabethan government against a Jesuit priest. This is just another giant example of Elizabeth's allowed fool, coupled with the double whammy of the fact that the scene is driven by Feste, the fool, the author character of the play. Now, keep in mind that an attack by the bard upon the Puritans of his day is not necessarily the bard demonstrating Catholic sympathies. It may well have been more about defending the theater than it was about true religion. Because don't forget, at that time, the Puritans were the enemy of the theater. It's not much more than 50 years later than the origins of this play that the Puritans win for a large grip of time and finally burn the theaters to the ground. Shakespeare all but disappears until after the Restoration, which again is another future episode about the transmutation of Shakespearean works through the centuries, from that dark period of nothing to the Restoration and the corruption of Shakespeare to what we end up with later on. Now that there's a whole nother episode that I look forward to penning out for you. But let's get back to 1580, a date that this play may or may not have been written, but certainly has basis in historically. And one of the arguments I've been making for a while now is we must learn to appeal to historians to study these plays from a historical angle. And when they see the incidents of 1580 playing out in Twelfth Night, they're going to have no choice but to explore those further and try to figure out how did they end up in the text of this play. And I think that could change the world, in fact. But in that same year, 1580, ironically, a tremendous earthquake occurs. And of course, the Puritans of the day blamed it on the degradation of society caused by the influences of places like the theater. So Twelfth Night makes no bones about poking at these Puritans at a time when religious faiths are at their peak season, the Christmas season. I think that's important to note. Perhaps this was when Elizabeth figured out that the power of the theater could serve her will, that there is great power in theatrical propaganda. Had Edward suddenly taught her something about what theater could truly do, especially with this Twelfth Night play that sends these very pointed messages and attacks on people during a time when they are most susceptible. Had Edward taught Elizabeth something here? Had he effectively created a monster, his Frankenstein's monster, his worst nightmare? Or had he taught Burleigh and Walsingham something? Because 3 years later, in 1583, there is a crackdown on performances. There are immense restrictions on licenses to perform, and censorship of the theaters in Elizabethan England hits a brand new level. So maybe these two guys watched and went, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. This is too dangerous. This is too much. And you might have this fracture within Elizabeth's Privy Council at that point, between her wanting to embrace theater as propaganda for the good of the crown and Burleigh and Walsingham wanting to stifle theater as being dangerous and uncontrollable as a form of message. And when we look at the story about Richard II and the Essex Rebellion, we see some reflections of that too as well, right? But let's not stray. I would also love to do an episode on how geopolitical history affected the popularity and the importance of works of Shakespeare. But that's too many episodes already. We've just planned in just recording this one. So let's stay focused and take one last deep dive into a very strange connection Oxford has to Twelfth Night that I believe that must be explored. Some references, perhaps. In his book, De Vere as Shakespeare, Bill Farina, and it's a great one to buy, by the way, De Vere as Shakespeare by William Farina. Go find it, get it. You need to have it. It's such an easy read, and it points out so many wonderful things about each of the plays and their autobiographical nature. So pulling from him at the end here, Farina refers to a passage from Act 5, Scene 1 of Twelfth Night, where Orsino refers specifically to a legend of an Egyptian thief. Now, why is this important? Well, follow me here for just a moment, because it's just one of those many instances where the Earl of Oxford's literary history and prowess comes into play that has nothing to do with playwriting, but is in the record and undeniable. The amount of works that have been dedicated to him that he had a hand in, that he was a patron of, or that he provided some sort of content for, if nothing more than an introductory page or two. So here's what we know, right? When Thomas Underdown issues his English translation of an Ethiopian history by Heliodorus, so translated from Heliodorus into English, Underdown embarks upon this immense undertaking of work, creates this magnificent volume, and he dedicates it to who? At the time, 19-year-old Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford. Now, why would Underdown do that? Why would Underdown dedicate this magnificent triumph of work to the 19-year-old Earl of Oxford? Why would Shakespeare of Stratford, if he's the true author of the play Twelfth Night, why would he make that very obscure reference in his play for Orsino to mention? And how could he even possibly know that reference? He didn't even have his own library. He didn't own a single book. Let's ponder that for a moment, while I encourage you to make a calendar, not for yourself, but for yourself and a friend, to be prepared for the January 19th, 2022 third anniversary episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. That's right. Don't Quill the Messenger will celebrate its third birthday, January 19th, 2022, and embark upon a fourth season thereafter. Now, we will be in our traditional annual format, which will include our anniversary episode that will revisit moments from the previous year, read emails from listeners, both good and bad, and share your sonnets. That's right. I am challenging you, fellow Quillers, right now. Make a note. You have less than 2 weeks. Send me your sonnets. In the next 2 weeks, we want to see your sonnets, and you may hear them on the air in the next episode. You can send them to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Write out a sonnet, anything of your choice, any theme, any words, any verses. Be a Sondheim if you think you can be a Shakespeare if you can't. Do whatever you can. Send us a sonnet. We're going to judge the best entries. And what we determine here in the production studios is the winning sonnet will receive a 1-year, $44 digital membership to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, courtesy of me. That's right. Send me a winning sonnet, and I'll pay for your membership dues for 1 full year to the SOF. There you go. You'll get access digitally to the 4 quarterly newsletters. And I'll tell you, that's one of the great benefits of membership to the organization is receiving those newsletters and staying informed about book reviews, about the research of your fellow Oxfordians, about the programs and activities of the organization, and about how you can be involved in the organization. Don't forget, membership is not just about paying dues and then walking away for a year. It's about paying your dues and being involved, getting involved, joining a committee, volunteering on a subcommittee, speaking your voice. Just recently, membership received a link to a survey for the president of the organization to learn about what members of the organization think about how we're doing and what we're doing. If you haven't completed that survey as of today, when this episode airs, you have, I believe, 1 day. You have until the epiphany. Here's an epiphany. Send an epiphany to the president through the survey. The epiphany is it's due tomorrow if you're listening to this on day of broadcast. So January 6th is the deadline. Anyway, send me your sonnets in the next 12 days because I have to give producer Jake time to go through them as well. And we'll choose a winner and we will pay your dues to the organization. If you've already renewed your membership and you send me a winning sonnet, then we will pay for a second year for you, and your dues for next year will be already covered. So send us a sonnet. There you go. It's the Don't Quill the Messenger Send Us a Sonnet contest. Send us a sonnet. Get your quills ready. Write us something awesome and send it to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Now, let's examine the title of this play before we wrap it up this evening or this morning or this afternoon or whatever time it is or where you are that you are listening. And we always want to thank you for taking us with you and letting us invade your life with this wonderful series. And let's examine the title of the play and how it plays into the themes of sexuality carried out in the plot. I mean, come on, it's What You Will is the actual title of the play. And I think that that's connected very clearly to some of the characters in the play. The legend I always heard, though, was that What You Will became known as Twelfth Night because it was performed first as a 12th night entertainment. And people referred to it as, oh, that 12th night play. But that's just a legend. And there are also legends about a man from Stratford that I don't believe in either. However, if we can connect De Vere to Twelfth Night in Siena just 2 days or the day before Piccolomini's play was going to be presented, then we can certainly connect this play to a Twelfth Night celebration and thus a Twelfth Night connection. Looking at What You Will as either the original title or a subtitle of the play, it truly doesn't matter. We can still see a humorous yet poignant connection to the play's sexual ambiguity and a message that says love doesn't specifically follow gender. That's revolutionary in 1580 or in 1602, whenever you believe that the play was first written. The message seems to be that love is not specific to gender. Wow. Look around us in the world today and how we have finally embraced that in so many circles. Maybe not in every circle, but enough. Maybe not enough. Maybe we need more, but enough that it's so different from then. And look at what he was saying then. It's pretty revolutionary. It's pretty incredible. I always like to say, Shakespeare is one of the first feminists. He's also one of, I believe, the first, I don't want to say gay marriage supporters, but he obviously says, what you will. It's not my business. Your bedroom's not my place. There are a lot of nobles when you think about it. We know stories. Come on, we know how many of the members of the nobility were secretly sleeping with this person or that person, or had mistresses here or lovers there, or gay lovers here or gay lovers there. This is not an uncommon theme. And I think here we have a writer who is just poking at everyone and everything he can and making statements and messages through this play. And it's also one of the longest comedies, by the way. Trust me, I know this because I've sat through it several times that were not great performances, and I've produced it. And it's not an easy play to produce, to keep it moving, to keep it clicking, to keep it humorous and funny. There are trouble moments in this play, and it's because they are political statement moments that modern audiences don't tend to get, or that you have to kind of help them understand. One that is easy to understand is this message of love knows no gender. And one of the things we have to remember is that the term homosexual was not a thing then. In fact, most people at that time viewed sexuality in more of a traditional Greco-Roman way, as in how Horatio says to Hamlet, I am more antique Roman than a Dane. Now, of course, Horatio is talking about the honorable Roman suicide that he is contemplating by trying to find poison in the cup. That same type of Roman suicide that is depicted in Julius Caesar or in Antony and Cleopatra. But that unique Roman quality is something I think the Bard is alluding to with this play as well. And that is that there's not a judgment about sexuality. Now, that's not to say that Edward de Vere was, some sort of, orgy having licentious, crazy, hedonist. But I do think that there is evidence that he obviously did not hold to the precepts of the monogamous Christian marriage. He had an affair outside of marriage. He had a child out of wedlock. Bastardy is an issue in the plays. But I think what he's saying here is that the play casts judgment upon people for political and personal reasons, while it also carries a message of tolerance when it comes to matters of the heart. And I think that's an extreme stretch and difference in this play. So you've got this scene that is outright condemning the Puritans for torturing this Jesuit priest in the name of religion and attacking the upstart crows, as it were, of the court, with Sidney and Hatton getting nailed in the lampooning that's going on. But at the same time, it's saying, hey, whoever you're attracted to, whoever you want to sleep with, I don't care about that. That's not my place. It's not my world. And there are worse things to worry about. Love is love. Love is from the heart. As long as it's from the heart, it doesn't matter. And I think that's one of the messages of the play. And I think it's one of the reasons why the play is so endearing to this day and continues to be a popular piece. Now notice that the recognized Oxfordian author character of the play, Feste, is not a romantic character. If Oxford is Feste, which most Oxfordians believe to be true, then he's an outside observer and an outright critic of love and sexuality, who actually makes comments negatively about marriage and about love. They're witty and profoundly wise in some cases, but he finds humor in what he obviously sees, much like the audience, much like the eyes and ears of the audience that he becomes. And he finds the humor in the truth of the characters that are presented. He's sort of our tour guide through the story, Feste. And just as his master and creator, Oxford, is the tour guide to us all through each of his works. Feste is also a musical clown, and indeed the prototype for many characters later created for the Broadway stage, I would say. He's a true minstrel. There's something Feste-esque about the rooster in Disney's Robin Hood cartoon, if you're familiar with that film, which is one of my favorites. And I can't think of the actor right now who plays the rooster, but there's something very Feste-esque about that bird in that cartoon. And indeed, Feste is that sort of prototype, that minstrel prototype for so many other characters that come after him later. Twelfth Night is indeed one of the Bard's most musical plays. And we could get into the Bard's mastery and expertise with music, but then again, there's a whole nother episode for a whole nother day. In fact, fellow Quillers, send me your suggestions for music masters of Shakespeare I could possibly invite to be a guest of this program. That would be a great episode. I'd love to have someone who knows music extremely well and knows the music of the Bard. That would be fantastic, because it's obvious that Edward de Vere's connection to music and the connection to music that you can find in the Shakespearean canon cannot be separated. And is another area for, I believe, more research and exploration. So let's quickly talk about that before we wrap things up after this word from our sponsors. Did you know the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship contributes up to $20,000 per year to successful applicants who use those funds to advance Oxfordian research and relevant projects for the future of the movement? When you join the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, you know that a portion of your annual dues are supporting future research into the Shakespeare authorship question. And as a dues-paying member in good standing, you are a voice in the future of that research. Consider joining today. Visit ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org to learn more. That's ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. So as I was saying before the break, send me your suggestions of Shakespeare music masters I can invite to be my guest on the program. That would be a great future topic. And don't forget, you have less than 2 weeks to send us your sonnets to be read on air during our 3rd anniversary episode coming up next time, 2 weeks from the release of this episode today. And as always, I want to thank you for listening and allowing us into your world wherever you are and whatever you're doing right now as you hear this. We appreciate you, fellow Quillers. We appreciate you. Keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
Dragon Wagon.